huge breaking news that Ian Huntley has died in hospital. He was attacked recently in prison by a prisoner with a barbed metal pole and just taken off life support this morning. Obviously, it's hard to mourn the death of someone who murdered two girls so brutally.
Absolutely, Olivia. It'll be very interesting to see the reaction to that incident, those violence in prisons. There's a bit of a debate cropping up already, I think, about the death penalty for people like Ian Huntley. Why do we, as a society, often say no to the death penalty, but then celebrate it, many people do, when someone is killed in prison? We'll be discussing that later as we get more reaction to the death of Ian Huntley, killed in prison after being taken off life support.
And would love to know what you think about that.
Let's go back to that breaking news now. The Soham killer, Ian Huntley, has died in hospital after he was attacked in the workshop of the maximum security Franklin prison in County Durham by an inmate with a metal bar on February the 26th.
Yes, his life support machine was turned off last night. I mean, huge news here. We have been expecting this since the life support machine was turned off last night. As you say, Charlie, a bit of a debate going on now about, natural justice, can you call it in prison? Vigilante justice?
And first and foremost, our thoughts, Olivia, they will definitely be with the families of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, those best friends who were killed by Ian Huntley, because any reference to this barbaric man will revitalise those horrible memories, those horrible feelings they have of those, what must have been gut-wrenching days in 2002. But we can now bring in our national reporter, Will Godley, who joins us in the studio. Will, what can you tell us about this incident?
Well, we've just in the last minute or so had a statement from Durham Constabulary. They have said a man who was attacked at HMP Franklin in Durham last week has died in hospital this morning. Ian Huntley, 52 years old, was taken to hospital with serious injuries following an incident in the workshop on the morning of Thursday, 26th of February. A police investigation into the circumstances of the incident is ongoing. A file is being prepared for the Crown Prosecution Service for consideration of charges. Of course, it was widely reported that attack just over 10 days ago now in the workshop of that high security prison, HMP Franklin, when Ian Huntley, of course, 52-year-old man, was attacked with a spike, and according to The Sun, his head split in two. He was left unrecognisable, and paramedics there found him barely breathing and covered in blood. He was, of course, airlifted then to hospital. We know he was on life support, and that life support then turned off. This isn't, of course, the first time he was attacked in hospital. Of course, due to the nature of his horrific crimes, he was a widespread target for attacks. Back in 2010, he underwent emergency surgery after his throat was cut from a homemade weapon. And in 2005 as well, an inmate threw boiling water over Huntley as well in a prison in West Yorks. But this morning, Durham Constabulary confirming he's died after his life support turned off.
And well, we have a statement we can bring you now from the Ministry of Justice. A spokesperson there has said the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman remains one of the most shocking and devastating cases in our nation's history, and our thoughts are with their families. And Will, you've just spoken about the previous attacks Ian Huntley faced in prison, his throat being cut with a homemade weapon in 2010. There will also be serious questions for the prison authorities about their internal security, about how they manage to keep prisoners safe and how attacks like this have been able to happen.
Absolutely. It's not the first attack that's happened in prisons over the last few years. There have, of course, been some very high-profile ones, and HMP Franklin is a very high-security prison where this attack happened at the workshop, of course, where prisoners would have had access to things that could be used as weapons. And we understand a man in his 40s has been identified, a prisoner there also at the prison has been identified in connection with this ambush. Police not saying yet that he's been arrested. They're working on putting a charge file together for the CPS to consider charges here. But of course, he was a very high target for his crimes. Of course, a horrific attack back in 2002 for murdering two best friends, two 10-year-old girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. In the summer of 2002, they were at a family barbecue, of course, were leaving that family barbecue on their way to go and buy sweets when the local school caretaker lured those two girls into his home, murdered them, and their bodies then found some 2 weeks later in a ditch 10 miles away, before Ian Huntley was later arrested in connection to this and arrested for what was an absolutely horrific crime, front page news over 20 years ago. And I don't think anyone today, of course, will be mourning this man.
Well, thank you very much, Will, and we'll hope to hear more from you on this breaking story throughout the programme. I so remember the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. I was exactly the same age as them at the time, and it was just the most horrific, horrible story. And I'd just like to echo Charlie's sentiments that if any of their families are watching this today, our thoughts are with you.
Right, let's now speak to the policing and crime commentator, Danny Shaw, who joins us now. Danny, good morning to you. I suppose, first and foremost, this killing, his death, Ian Huntley's death, is a reminder of the dangers faced within prisons towards sex offenders and that the state cannot guarantee their safety.
Well, first of all, I think no one is going to mourn the loss of Ian Huntley, an evil man who committed the most barbaric crimes against two 10-year-old girls, crimes that completely shocked the country. When they occurred in 2002, the horror of what had happened, the way that he had manipulated or tried to manipulate journalists who were covering the case, tried to sort of insert himself in the story, and then lied about what had happened, pleaded not guilty, so there was a full trial, and then was convicted with a 40-year minimum term. No one is going to mourn his loss at all. However, we ought to be concerned when violent incidents take place in prison, because it feeds into the lack of safety for staff and prisoners. It creates a dangerous environment, and clearly that is not conducive to security in prisons and to rehabilitation of prisoners who are going to be let out at some point. Huntley was never going to be let out. He was given a 40-year minimum term. I think there was no chance of him ever being freed. But there are other prisoners in jail who are going to be let out, and we want them to come out and lead law-abiding lives. And when you have violence in prisons, that doesn't help.
How was the prisoner who attacked him able to get hold of a spiked pole? And it sounds as though this attack, 15 stabs, it sounds as though it was pretty prolonged. Why did no one step in? Perhaps I'm being naive.
Well, I mean, first of all, this will be subject to a criminal investigation by the police. We understand that Durham police are investigating the incident. And I think that is one of the sort of the side issues of creating a prison regime in which you have more and more prisoners who are serving very, very long sentences, some with no prospect of release. But you asked the question how he got hold of a metal pole with a spiked end to it. It is possible for some prisoners to sort of manage to fashion weapons out of implements, out of tools that are being used in workshops and so on. But how he managed to do that, what kind of supervision he was under, that really is a question for the investigation. I mean, all I would say is prisoners have got so much time on their hands. They spend hours and hours thinking of ways in which they can either get drugs into prison, in which they can attack other people, in which they can plot an escape. And some of them come up with ingenious ways of doing that. It is not beyond the realms of possibility. We've seen it before, for prisoners to manage to get weapons in or to fashion weapons out of everyday items that happen to be in prison. But that will be the subject of an investigation, I'm sure, because this is not the first time that it has happened at Franklin prison, and that I think will be a huge concern, this high security jail. What sort of steps are being put in place to stop these kinds of events happening?
Yeah, especially because that's a prison where terrorism offenders are kept, including members of ISIS, etc. But policing and crime commentator Danny Shaw, thank you very much for your time this morning. We should